And I want to welcome all of you guys to this webinar with Grant and Louise Bentley. And this is a huge treat because they are going to be discussing homeopathic facial analysis, which they have developed and have taught in over 25 countries to date. And so we are really excited to have them here to talk about this new approach that they have created. And just so you all know, this is recorded and will be posted to the RadarOpus website. And if you have questions, please write them either in the comment box or the question and answer, and we will have a short Q&A at the end of the presentation. So thank you so much, Grant and Louise, for being here. We really appreciate your time, and we're excited to hear what you have to talk to us about.
No, it's our pleasure.
You're welcome.
It's interesting when you say that it's a new system. Of course, it's new for you, but we've been doing this for quite a while now. I don't know exactly when we started.
We're in year 22 now.
Yeah, year 22. So it's a new system for a lot of people, but it's after 22 years, it doesn't seem that new to us. In fact, as one person said to me one time, it's the best system I've never heard of. It's a we started, like we said, about 22 years ago. It essentially just started with I was teaching at the Victorian College Classical Homeopathy, of which we still do run, but all through online now. But back in those days when it was bricks and mortar, we're talking back in the 90s at that stage, that we were going through the organon. I have probably done the organon 12 times or so, even at that stage. I haven't read it for a little while now, but I'm pretty familiar with it. We used to teach it over and over and over again, as you should. I mean, it's the foundation, right? But at the same time, I thought I was giving it a little bit of lip service, to be quite frank. I had kind of gone into that robotic mode where I was reading through the organon and explaining a number of the different aphorisms, but I was kind of doing it via rote. And I was one day just going through how much emphasis Hahnemann places on miasmatic prescription as being the foundation for constitutional prescribing, and that in fact you can't do one without understanding the other. All constitutional prescription should be based on the miasm. That was the difference between an acute prescription and a constitutional prescription. We all know that story about how he would treat the bronchitis year after year, only for it to return, and that's how he knew that there was something deeper going on. So in Hahnemann's mind, there was a missing link, and this miasm was the missing link. The problem with that missing link is how to identify it. How there are 1,000 different ways that homeopaths look at miasms, from something that is a layer to something that is a state of mind, something that is a state of time. So it was all fairly confusing, and so what I decided to do was do my own private research into understanding what a miasm is, and essentially it led me to the development of HFA. And essentially it's because, always going back to that very Hahnemannian principle of making absolutely sure that every constitutional prescription has the miasm at its base. Without that, it's not a constitutional prescription. I guess at this point, what I'll also do is just highlight what I think a constitutional medicine is, because there's going to sometimes be confusion over that. But essentially, a constitutional remedy is a remedy that is trying to achieve more than 2 or 3 symptom changes with the one remedy. Now, sometimes that can be achieved in a zigzagging fashion, and sometimes that it can be achieved with just one particular medicine. but as long as we get there, and as long as the aim is to improve the person, that's the whole basis of what a constitutional prescription is to boost the vitality of the person, so that indirectly then affects all the symptoms that they have. The difficulty was getting good results consistently. What I would do, as I'm sure most homeopaths have already experienced, is particularly at the beginning when I was more a Kentian prescriber than what I would say in Sankaran or Sholton or any, but mainly because I was just before them. So I was sort of a very Kentian prescriber in going down the mentals and so on. But it was very hit and miss. And I understand probably now why it was hit and miss, because it was too subjective. What I needed was good results consistently. I was talking to Anna before we started recording here. I'm a naturopath also, and so there's a number of strings to your bow, and we can go through nutrition, we can go through herbal medicine, we can go through different dietary and exercise changes. So we can make a lot of positive influences to people. I didn't necessarily need homeopathy, but I had experienced it once of the change that it can produce. And so I was kind of sold from that moment. And so I had to make it work. I wanted to make it work. The problem for me at the start was that I would get probably 20 misses to every one hit that I would have. And the moment that I was ready, I got to my 19th miss and I'm ready to give it up. And then someone comes in, the 20th person comes in, and they've had such a fantastic result and better than you could ever achieve off herbs, better than you could ever achieve off dietary change. And so I always knew there was something there, but that something was so elusive. So I guess I started off on my own quest to try and make these results more consistent, because I needed to have confidence in it. And this is what I think every homeopath needs, is that they want to have confidence in the simillimum that they're choosing. The bottom line is, I've been doing this for 30 years now, or close to, and the bottom line is that the simillimum is right and homeopathy works. And it's really now how we can make it work consistently. So all HFA is a process that I've developed to try and make homeopathy as consistent as what it can possibly be. One of the things that, like I started off saying, that I was very much a Kentian prescriber, which essentially just means that I was more focused on the mentals and taking a case that way than I was on the physicals. And I think after now my 30-year experience, me talking to my earlier 1-year experience, me would be, listen, the problem with the mentals is that they are a little interpretive, and they're very, very changeable in your patient from day to day. So if you can get into a physical grounding, you are probably better off. It's possibly, look, in some ways it's not difficult to do. You've got to understand though what physicals you're after. I think that's it. I mean, if we go back into Kent always spoke about, if you started with pathology, you'd already started with a mistake. You're not really going to get anywhere with that. Not sure I totally agree with that, but I understand where he's coming from. It's very generalized, plus it's the outcome. The pathology is still the signs and, it's still the signs and symptoms of where the weakness in the body is. Otherwise, you wouldn't have developed that pathology in that manner. But the reality is that pain is often pain and inflammation is inflammation. So it's perhaps not as individualized as what we would like it to be. So that's why if we're going to go down the physical body, and the body doesn't lie, the body doesn't make mistakes in that fashion, but we do need to know how to read it properly. So we need to understand, even Hahnemann used to say this, he used to talk about, we need to understand the PQRS. What is an important physical symptom versus a less important physical symptom? We're after that specific physical uniqueness. And he talks about that uniqueness in aphorism 10 and 11, where he stresses the changes in demeanor when we talk about the mentals, changes in demeanor are a good sign of a symptom that you should take. This is a placid person who suddenly becomes aggressive or vice versa. But this emphasis on the generals of selecting the simillimum still is the most important, because as you remember, he talks about, he being Hahnemann, says that above all other symptoms, it's the PQRS symptom, what is peculiar and characteristic of each symptom, is the top of what we should look for in the hierarchy of the importance of the symptoms. Now, essentially, what he does do then is he goes on to identify how we can understand what each PQRS is. And that is, he goes and gives instructions. Ask the patient, is it better when they sit down? Is it better when they walk around? What's time of day that it might be, and so on. All these create the PQRS symptoms. And essentially what they are is that he's talking about the modalities. They're the things that make it better and worse. Now, I understand that in modern times we have taken the PQRS symptom to be different to the modalities. We take PQRS symptoms to be something extraordinarily rare, but that's not necessarily what he meant. He meant that as well. But when you go back through the organon, he is talking to about the modalities in reference of finding the symptom. The symptom is important, but it's the modifying factors. What makes it better and worse is your PQRS. And we in HFA have placed huge emphasis on these modalities because they are the basis of our prescription. Then what we do is that we then take the physical symptoms of the facial analysis into account, because the problem with the modalities is that we might end up with 30 or so remedies because they're general, right? They're very broad. You might have, I don't generally take symptoms like worse at night, because if you look up some of the rubric for that, you might find 800 or so remedies in there. So you're not really narrowing it down. But what I will do is that I try and get modalities where there's even 1 to 200, because you're casting a really broad net over the case, and then you're reeling it in so you can understand what the remedy that you choose you want to have in as many of these modalities as possible. But because they are broader, you are left with a greater number of remedies. And this is where the facial analysis comes in, because then what we can do is we can then narrow down that broad group into just 2 or 3 remedies to start with. So the thing that I like about HFA, and the reason that I developed it, is because I wanted to take the speculation out of it, because I needed to move away from that 1 in 19 hit to try. Now I can confidently say, look, if you give me 4 goes at a case, I'll usually be able to influence it positively to a 60 plus percentage improvement. Often we can get into the 80s and 90% improvement. So it's based on observation, it's based on physical structure, and then we do our repertorization primarily with the emphasis on the modalities. And what that does is that it gives us the confidence because of those reproducible results. If I have people coming into my, I've kind of moved from the, yes, I've had a success with your remedy, a patient saying that, and me being surprised, into actually the remedy didn't do something and now being surprised. It's a really big shift. I just expect that people are going to respond now. So the main thing that I think that the takeaway from this is that when you need accurate case taking, but you can only have accurate case taking when you know what it is, what a case is. And the way that you know what a case is homeopathically is by knowing the hierarchy of what you need to repertorize on. So because I repertorize mainly on modalities and generals, that's what I'm looking for in a case. So I will take even, I have worked in the end, come to be a bit of a world specialist in a condition called pandas. It's a behavioral condition. You can all look it up if you don't know what it is. But for those who do know what it is, it's a behavioral condition, often weakens the body to such a degree that you end up with co-infections like Lyme's and Bartonella and all sorts of things. So it's a real challenge for any medicine. And I can tell you now that homeopathy works wonders with these kids. It is something where homeopathy, being an energetic medicine, is at the heart of a chronic condition. This is where it becomes really important to understand what a constitutional is, because a constitutional is a remedy that improves the vitality of the patient generally. It's not like an acute where you've got the two similars, the stronger pushing the weaker one out of the body. In a constitutional medicine, we replenish the body with sadly lacking energy, because it's all being taken up with pathology or worry or whatever it might be. And what we are doing is that we're refreshing the body with energy and keeping it that way. And so we indirectly affect all of these other symptoms. It's just wonderful how it works. But the basis of this is the miasm. If you don't get the miasm right, then you can't have the right constitutional. And the reason for that, and Louise will go into it in much more detail, is because a miasm is a way that your body is trying to defend itself and trying to bring about harmony. And if we can have a remedy that works in exactly that same way, then we have a remedy that is doubling up on the body's ability or the body's effort to try and heal itself. So as it says here on this screen, it's the miasm plus the totality of the symptoms. I originally started going down this HFA pathway because once I started to think, as I said earlier, about the Hahnemann and the miasms and forming the basis of every constitutional illness, I then read everything that I possibly could on the miasms, and I started to see through these authors here, Allen, Roberts and Forbister, that they all spoke about the imprint of the miasm on the physical body, not just in pathology, but also too in appearance, facial structure, the whole thing. So essentially the kernel that started HFA was, so far miasms are interpretive. Are they a state of mind? Are they a legacy? What do we have to do with them? But what I did know is that they needed to be included into the constitutional prescription. But how do you do that if you're do you just take it that all pathology, anything that is destructive is immediately syphilitic? In which case, why does sulfur, for example, have so many destructive symptoms in it? What I found was that sulfur is not, no, I'm going to leave that. I'll leave that for you. So what the bottom line is here is that I figured that if we could figure out before we gave the remedy what miasm that remedy belonged to, then match that to what we know the dominant miasm of the patient is. Now we're doing that Hahnemannian requirement of matching the miasm of the remedy to the miasm of the patient, and now the patient's generals of the case tell us which one of those remedies in that miasm to choose. Anyway, I'll leave it to you. I'll be back later for the Q&A. So if you've got any questions that you want to ask me, just quickly jot them down now, and I'll be back when you're finished.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about some specific elements of HFA and talking about the training that we do and showing you a couple of cases. So, yes, my name's Louise Bentley, and I've been working with Grant on this project for 22 years now. And we take different aspects of the training, and Grant's currently doing a lot of work in the clinic, and I'm doing a lot of work repackaging our training, which goes back 20 years. We've done a lot, and we have a really interesting way of helping you to become a HFA homeopath. So we do have online training. Most of it comes from Australia, but we have a little bit from India as well. So between about 1999 and 2002, as Grant mentioned, a lot of work was done looking at facial structure and what classical homeopathy was all about and trying to bring the two together. We coined this homeopathic facial analysis, which is a bit of a mouthful, so it quickly became HFA. We started with the face and the link to the miasm, but fairly quickly the process of HFA became more than that, as we really focused on the most important aspects of classical homeopathy. In the end, we came to realise it was really a simplified but very direct form of homeopathy, and we did a lot of seminars, quite a number of books, a lot of teaching, online and otherwise, and we developed our Australian full HFA online course. So let's fast forward all those years to 2021, I think we call it now, don't we? 2021, hard to believe. And we have really streamlined these courses. And as Anna mentioned at the beginning, we have taught students of homeopathy, practitioners of homeopathy, quite a number of non-homeopaths joining us now, which is really exciting. And we have been able to kind of streamline all of this training into about 100 hours total, which we're really proud of. As you would all know, it's usually at least 2,000 hours to learn homeopathy. And although there's a lot in those 2,000 hours, there's a lot that takes us off on different tangents. So we wanted to bring it back to the purest form using miasm and totality. So in brackets here, we've got a 7-hour course, then our major 80 hours, then another 7 hours, and then a little bit of one-on-one mentoring. And with that 100 hours, you can get to a really confident place with your homeopathic clinic. So as I mentioned, our courses come from both Australia and a little bit from India. Okay, so in 2018, we were invited to India. We had been before, but the Homeopathic Academy, which was an extension of B. Jane Publishing, they wanted classes from leading homeopaths in the world, but particularly India, but some from Europe and Australia, to help practitioners and graduates extend their education. So we trotted off, luckily, a year before this crazy 2020 year, and we did get to record 20 classes in Delhi in early 2019. Grant did 10 of those classes, covering a summarised version of HFA methodology, its philosophy and case management. And I worked on the face, facial analysis and cases, 10 classes each. Now, you might be asking yourself, depending where you are on your homeopathic journey, is why learn any new method? Well, what we say is you deserve to become a confident practitioner in the shortest period of time. You've probably read many of the old books saying it takes 10, maybe 20 years to get there. That can be a little disheartening when you're in year 1 or 2. You've got a long way to go. This short period of time is around 6 months, and that's pretty good. And we can take you from pretty much zero to being really competent and confident in quite a short period of time. This is all based around the miasm in the face. I think we've all come to realise that homeopathy can be difficult. We've all got our personal story to tell, and I've never met a homeopath who didn't start out realising this is quite a difficult topic. But there's no doubt that HFA makes homeopathy easier. It is reproducible, it's really effective, it's for chronic cases. But we've also discovered, particularly in 2020, how much it builds your immunity during acute phases. And we've done quite a number of COVID cases, which have all turned out really well using HFA as the base, just getting to know what that dominant miasm of each patient is. Okay, so let's just go back to homeopathy in general. So you're learning homeopathy, and one of the things you quickly discover is there's so many different methods and different ways to find a remedy. So we're just going to list some of them here. I'm sure you're familiar with most, if not all. So you can look at the mind, which Grant mentioned. You can look at an idea of essence. Miasms themselves, I think there's more than 200 interpretations worldwide, which is an awful lot of interpretations. Layers theory, you've got repertorizing, looking at materia medica, studying the philosophy, looking at remedy pictures, might go for keynotes. There's the generals, then there's the specifics. There's looking at it from a pathological point of view. There's lots of different routines based around individuality. It's a lifetime, probably many lifetimes of learning. And then you get to this point, you go, well, which one's right and which one's wrong? They're really very different. And the reality is every aspect of these instructions does have some fundamental truth, okay? There is something true in all. But if you do go and compare and contrast each method, and Grant did a lot of work on this in the 1990s, you'll find there's many gaps and many contradictions. So we've got to ask ourselves why. And I think it's because homeopathic remedies are essentially energetic memories of a substance. And they're really difficult to differentiate. They're difficult to measure. This is one of the reasons traditional science is not that interested in homeopathy. They like things that are very clear and very measurable. And homeopathy is not clear and measurable. However, it works really, really well. So there's something we need to learn. So when we look at a remedy, we realise that it's really only after the remedy is given that we get to see their effect, because there's this resonance between the individual and the remedy, as you all know. So provings are one really clear way we can start to learn about a remedy, or we can learn about them from clinical experience. Of course, we know there are 3 areas to understand quite separately within homeopathy. That is the chronic, the acute, and first aid. And most of us tend to work in the chronic area. The reality is this chronic illness, particularly in first world for a variety of environmental reasons, is way and above a higher presentation of illness than the other 2. And what you start to realise is that homeopathy is quite a reactive methodology. It's not all that proactive. There are ways you can use it in advance. You can predict to a certain degree, but in most cases, we cannot predict what is going to happen. So we only give a remedy after a pattern of symptoms emerges, and we work with that pattern. So we have provings, we have repertories, and we have materia medicas. So you all know from very early in year 1 homeopathy that approvings are a random collection of information about a single remedy that have only been put together after testing's been done on people. Whereas repertories provide a collective data via symptoms, via symptom allocation. And then, of course, we have our materia medicas, which are summaries of remedies, generally just part of a remedy's data, or possibly a personalised view based on one or a few patients that a particular author has put together. So that's a lot of information: provings, repertories, materia medicas. And the question is which is easier to work with? Because they are quite different, even though they represent the same thing. And for us, we clearly and quickly discovered it was about the repertories. The repertories give us this collective data via symptom allocation. It's all sorted, it's all collated. And thanks to companies such as Radar, who've done a lot of work over many years to put all this together in a software format, we can work really succinctly and quickly with this massive amount of data that's been gathered over 200 years. Okay, so we go back to chronic illness and we look at this pathway. What is chronic illness? Now, Grant will does some wonderful classes on all of this and puts a lot more information in, of course, than what we can expect in a webinar, but let's just do a little overview. So essentially, we're born and all of us have some weak parts of our body. Pretty much everybody has 1, 2, or even more weak organs or body areas that they bring in with them. And then over time, stress occurs in various forms, and it might be physical stress, it might be energetic, it might be emotional. And those weak parts begin to show stress. So we start seeing symptoms. Now, the job of the homeopathic remedy is to rebalance and relieve the stress in the body, which then in turn becomes a lessening of symptoms. Where stress remains, it's very hard to get back to zero, but we can go well toward that 60, 70, 80, 90, 95%, where that stress is still remaining. Obviously, it's up to the homeopath to try and help the patient isolate what the stress is and come up with strategies to remove it, but it's not always possible. However, when the stress does not continue, the removal of symptoms can be really achieved with the right resonating remedy. The only job of the homeopath is to find a remedy for the patient that brings them back to health. That is our sole aim. It should be the quickest, most deepest acting and most gentle acting remedy. A remedy that resonates to the totality and the miasm of the patient. Sometimes we have to move from one remedy to another to find that best remedy. We always work with one at a time, and we always work from the same miasm. And the miasm is diagnosed via the facial structure. So it belongs to both the patient and the remedy. So the chance of good resonance is much higher. Now, having gone over all these different methods, a question comes up, which is, should we learn different methods as students? And of course we should. Any undergraduate program is going to give you a broad overview of the topic. You'll see this in many areas, not just homeopathy. Should we thoroughly test the method that we most understand and want to use for clinical application? And the answer is yes. We really should be a master of one method, not just lightly understanding many methods or mixing all of them together. That's really a problem within homeopathy. We start with this broad selection, and it's up to us as practitioners to really decide which method is going to appeal and then become a master of it. So we invite you to look at HFA. We've found an incredibly high percentage of students don't ever leave it. It's so clear, it's so concise, so reproducible. The outcomes are great. It's a really good way of doing homeopathy. So we go to that list that we looked at earlier on. Remember all the different ways that we can learn homeopathy, from the mind and the essence to the different versions of miasms, the repertorizing, materia medica, the philosophy, the remedy pictures, the keynotes, general specifics, pathology, different routines, looking at individuality. Like, that's a long list. That's more than a lifetime to even begin to be a master. What we do in HFA is we only take 2 of those, just 2, and we link them together, and we find just 2 are enough to consistently find deep, fast-acting remedies. Okay, so we go back to 1999, and Grant interpreted that a miasm is actually a defense mechanism of the patient. It works with the remedy and the patient's own restorative power to rebalance and remove symptoms. So we add this idea of this defense mechanism, this miasm, to repertorizing through generals. And Grant talked about those at the beginning. The generals are such powerful ways of understanding the body and what it is we're needing to heal. So miasm plus totality from the repertorization equals 2 methods joined to find 1 remedy. Okay, so we go back to our list, and we only need to look at 2. You really only need to learn 2. The rest are all very interpretive. They're not all that useful in clinic when you master the miasm and you master repertorizing via the generals with particular emphasis on the modalities. Just those 2 alone can lead us to a really good place. Now, we're only going to briefly touch the face. The face is a huge topic in its own right, and yet quite simple and quite easy to learn once you've got that blueprint in place. So what we've come to discover over time is the face is an external structure that we all have, and it represents our internal energy. So simple forms of structure create our face. So we've all got eyes and nose and mouth and hairlines and foreheads and cheeks and chins and so forth, and teeth, hopefully. And that's all formed from very simple structure into your own individual form. So we destructure that in a way and pull out those simple forms. The face is a lifelong blueprint to our defense mechanism. And even as our face changes with age, that blueprint remains the same. The most successful, earliest child case we ever did was when we had a baby brought to us at 4 days old, and we worked out the miasm of that child. And I think that child's now around 7 and still resonates beautifully to the remedy we chose at 4 days of age, which is really something, because you're not getting much from a 4-day-old baby, and even the mother doesn't know the baby very much. Few modalities in the face, and we found the right remedy. Really exciting stuff. So there's 3 images there, very much just focused on the forehead from profile view, and you can see the first one has a straight line but on an angle, the next one has a straight line but it's more vertical, and the third one has a curved line. This is the simplicity of HFA. How many miasms? Grant detailed this in his first book from 2003, Appearance and Circumstance, which took the 3 primary miasms, psora, psychosis and syphilis, which are on our triangle points up the top and the 2 sides. And you'll see psora has been allocated yellow, psychosis red, syphilis blue. And then our 3 duo miasms, when we join, the tubercular comes from the psora and the syphilis, so it becomes green. The psychosora from the psora and the psychosis, so it's orange. And the psychosyphilis from the psychosis and the syphilis, which is purple. And then we have that 1 trio miasm, which takes a selection from psora, syphilis and psychosis, and we gave that the colour brown, which is the cancer miasm. So you'd be familiar with most of these miasms. There's less focus on psychosora and psychosyphilis, although when you go to India, they do talk about those miasms, but they are absolutely definitively separate miasms, what we call orange and purple. We do get asked this question, and Grant will explain this. Why are the colours different to Ortega? You may or may not have heard of Ortega, who wrote in 1977 about miasms and did allocate colours. Different colours, though, for different reasons. Basically, most miasmatic methods are based on pathology, including Ortega's, whereas HFA is based on directional force or defence mechanisms. And we wanted this idea of directional force to be really clear in people's mind. Directional force forms matter, and matter creates shape, size, and angles. And our remedies come from matter, then we deconstruct them back the other way to pull out the energy. So we're going backwards and forwards with this relationship between energy and matter. So we define psora as outward motion. Its universal energy is similar to that of the sun. It moves forward all the time in an outward direction. We define psychosis, or red, as circular motion. This is the universal energy of cycles. And we define syphilis, or blue, as inward motion, which is the universal energy of gravity. And really, these three universal energies form all matter and are why we live here on a three-dimensional planet. So, is there a link between pathology and these directional forces? Well, generally, no, there's not a huge link. There may be a slightly increased trend between some pathologies and some miasmatic groups, but only a maybe. It's certainly not enough to be diagnostic with. It's not enough to choose remedies. We have examples of cancer, skin problems, digestive, nervous system, lungs, autoimmune behaviour from all 7 groups or all 7 miasms. So it's the end result, but it's not necessarily defining what the blueprint is. So we have to step back and look at the face to find that blueprint. However, we did have to have a starting point, and Hahnemann certainly gave us a fabulous starting point with his miasmatic theory. And I think we're all pretty much in agreement, doesn't matter what methodology you use, that sulfur is dominantly psoric, thuya is dominantly psychotic, and mercury is dominantly syphilitic. So this was really important for us, these 3 remedies. This was a real starting point. So let's look at some rubrics based on miasms and pathology. So this is a standard book of, it's a repertory, obviously, and the repertories themselves even have the terminology psora in them. And you can see in this particular version, a lot of remedies there. So we're looking at psora, and we just go back to those 3 remedies, the mercury, the sulfur, and the thuya. And you can see they're all circled there. And out of those many remedies under psora that have been allocated, we find mercury, sulfur, and thuya. So that's sort of weird because we know that mercury's syphilitic and sulfur's psoric and thuya's psychotic. So what are they all doing under psora? Okay, so we look at psychosis. Again, the same repertory, gonorrhea or psychosis, and we find mercury, sulfur, and thuya are all attributed as remedies to that particular pathology. So again, this doesn't seem to differentiate either the pathology or the remedies. Let's look at syphilis. So we look at syphilis. This is the one disease name that kept the same name. And as a miasm, we're looking at mercury. We would expect to see it there, but we also see sulfur and thuya too. So I don't know about all of you, but I know by the time I got to 2nd year homeopathy and I had to do, we had to do a big project on miasms. And I concluded when I studied all of this that it almost didn't mean anything. It didn't differentiate at all, whether it was the miasm or the remedy, or the disease, the pathology. They just all seem to intermingle with one another. So let's look at the pathologies anyway. So let's pick a standard eczema, which, you know, we often think skin is psora. So we look at the rubric and we see there's mercury, there's sulfur, there's thuya, the same 3 again, all used for eczema. Again, not really differentiating this idea of pathology with a miasm or from a miasm. Let's go to warts, that traditional psychotic expression, supposedly, but we find mercury, sulfur, and thuya again. So we just, doesn't matter where we look, miasm, pathology, remedies, they're just intermingling. And the final one, of course, is let's just look at ulcers, the representation, you know, syphilitic ulcers in this particular case, again, mercury, sulfur, and thuya. So it doesn't take, you don't have to be a genius to start to see that there's something here that doesn't quite add up. You know, if miasms are all about pathology, why isn't it more clear? Why don't they relate to the remedies more? If remedies are about miasms, why doesn't that relate? Why doesn't that cross-match? The reality is it doesn't cross-match. So something isn't quite right with this miasm pathology idea. There's something not right about it. So we ask ourselves some questions. Are our repertories wrong? And the answer is no. We use our repertories in clinic all the time, but they are not wrong, that they work. Perhaps the rubrics are wrong. No, not really. They can be really, really effective. Nearly all good, broad, general rubrics are very effective, and they've been allocated from 200 years of provings and clinical research. So we ask the question, is pathology linked directly to some miasm models? And the answer would be yes, there is some relationship there. But is pathology linked directly to all miasmatic models? Definitely not. That's an absolute no. Are there links between pathology and remedies that are patient dependent? We would say yes, that is where the difference is. It's patient dependent. So the conclusion has to be that not all miasm or pathology models are the same. So we discovered through this HFA process of using the face that all patients have a dominant lifelong miasm and all remedies have a dominant lifelong miasm. And that totality gives us our case remedy potential, and using a HFA filter via the face, we match the remedies that only match the totality and the dominant miasm. So there's a bit too much on this slide probably, but I'll just briefly give this as an overview because you're probably asking a few questions that I haven't answered because this takes a bit of time. But let's just go back to this idea that the directional force forms the facial structure, which equals the miasm, which then highlights the group of remedies which will be best for the patient. But we also repertorize, and in phase 1, we narrow down our remedies to a very broad group that covers the totality of the patient. Then we use the facial analysis to determine which miasm the patient belongs to. Then in phase 2, we use a HFA miasm filter to narrow down that broad group even more. We have 7 groups, miasms, all based on directional forces in this system. We've tested around 70 odd remedies, plus there's about another 50 in a testing phase. You may think that's not a lot. We find more than enough. These polycrests are fantastic. There is a polycrest that helps just about everybody. It's very rare we go out of the polycrests, but we're always testing. We're always trying to find more remedies. However, those 70 are really inclusive. Sulfur is always given to patients who have both psoric dominant facial structure and the totality matches. Okay, they've got to have those 2 factors. Thea is given where there's dominant psychotic facial structure and the totality of their case matches. And it's the same for mercury. The patient must have syphilitically dominant facial structure and the totality matches. So that's just what we do with these remedies. We use all the polycrests and they are wonderful. Well covered under the repertories, well proven, lots of good cases. And you don't need to learn them as individual remedies. You just have to find them via repertorizing. So now we'll look just a little bit at the face. We've got some examples here of facial structure and this directional force. So we find these psoric or yellow features tend to be sloped, small, lots of multiple lines. They kind of have aerodynamic shapes, which of course represent outward motion. With psychosis, our red group, we find the features are larger, they're more full, they're round, or they might be straight, and this represents circular motion. And the syphilitic or blue features tend to be more crooked or curved, sharp or upward, and this is inward motion in action. The other 4 miasms just come from adding up the 3 primary miasms. We worked out a really simple formula by about 2002. We experimented a little in the first couple of years. Then this formula sort of made a bit of sense. We applied it and it just started working. It's a really easy formula. All features come from those 3 primary miasms, okay? But not all patients belong to one of those 3 primary miasms. They will belong to one of the 7. It's just how their facial structure is presenting. So let's just look at a few examples here. These are the psoric or yellow features, sloped, small, multiple lines, aerodynamic shapes. That's our outward motion. So the first image is the, I should have an arrow here, is the M-shaped hairline, which is aerodynamic, the downturn shape of the eyes, and these multiple lines on the forehead. They're just some examples. As I said, we've got about 75 features. Under the red group, the psychotic group, we see the large, full, round or straight features, circular motion in action. So there's our nice curved arc of the hairline, which is part of the circle, the very full lips and the wide mouth, or this lovely single line that's centered in the middle of the face. These are all examples of psychosis. And then we have the syphilitic or the blue group, crooked, curved, sharp, upward, inward motion in action. So here's our hairline, which is much more crooked than the other 2. Here's our eyes with the recessed lids drawn backwards into the head, so that's inward motion, and dimples, that drawing in dimples are a syphilitic feature. So as I've mentioned, we've allocated 75 features to these 3 primary miasms. We do apply a formula based on dominance to find the dominant patient miasm in every case, from newborn babies through to the elderly. A little easier as people get older because we develop a few more facial features, but most faces can be read if we get good photos. HFA is just so clinically reproducible, it is really worth a look. It is, as I've mentioned, suited to people who are quite new. Even if you don't even know homeopathy, you can just start fresh with this and it'll give you a great grounding. You might be a student in homeopathy, or you might be an older practitioner who just wants to find a bit more of a consistent approach to finding remedies. We've taught all people in all groups. Okay, here's Radar. We've got a Radar sponsored and hosted webinar today, and Radar have put some of the books into ebooks, and they have created a remedy filter within the program, which is really helpful for quickly getting to your remedies using HFA. Okay, so it kind of looks like this within the software package. You see the triangle, you click on the colour, and it takes you through to the remedy graph because you've already put in your rubrics. I'm going to show you some examples via cases. There are the two books. Appearance and Circumstance is the original. The Homeopathic Facial Analysis works with Appearance and Circumstance. They're like a duo. And then Soul and Survival is a really interesting book that Grant put together once he started to realise the amazing impact of these directional forces on our behaviour, what he calls inherited memory. So that's not specifically homeopathic, but it underpins all of HFA. It's a fabulous book. Okay, so we're going to do two cases. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly just to show you the process. They're not amazing cases. They're kind of what you call run-of-the-mill cases, but I'm sure if you're in clinic, you will have seen a lot of people coming through with digestive issues, and they can be really impact. Both these cases are younger women, and we'll show you the process. We take the case, we repertorize with focus on the generals and modalities. We look at the dominant miasm via the face, and then we use that HFA filter to draw together those two concepts, that is the miasm and the totality. So our first case, she's a female, she's aged 26, and we see her over just slightly more than a year. And she presents with stomach problems, a lot of bloating, swelling and distension. Sometimes it's so painful, she can barely walk. She's worse for walking, and she's doubled over with the pain. She's also worse for pressure, although she's okay lying on her stomach. She feels it's not really related to eating. She can't pinpoint it, and it is occurring at least once a week. She also occasionally gets a rash on her hands and feet, although only on holidays, which is an interesting thing in itself. She gets headaches too, dull in the temple area or the base of the head, and she has a bit of sleep and she feels better. Okay, she has a history of asthma and eczema. She's discovered she's better not eating gluten products. She can faint. She has quite a lot of allergies to flowers, pollen, cats and dust. She has nasal congestion, which is thick and stringy, and she has quite a painful jaw. It's very stiff and it clicks and it cracks. She has become a vegetarian and she doesn't really like meat or eggs. There's a little bit of chilblains that's been there, not a major symptom, but we just look at the overview. So she's actually had some remedies over these first few months. Sulfur, bryonia, lycopodium, and she's also tried pulsatilla in the past, but really only minor changes. So we take her case again in November 2019, and it turns out she's very busy. She works in quite a high-profile job. She's also studying, but she says she doesn't feel stressed, but her body is acting like it's very stressed. Sometimes there is a disconnect between how people view themselves and their lives and what their body's presenting. And Grant alluded to that at the beginning. It's really easy to misinterpret their interpretation or misinterpretation of themselves, whereas that body, it tells us a lot. It's pretty truthful, the body, so it's worth listening to. So her stomach, she's getting this bad pain once, if not twice weekly. It's worse in the afternoon to the evening. It's better after a sleep, worse for movement. It's better if she stays still or if she lies down. She says her muscles, they're really tense, and she's got this bloating and cramping. And as we've mentioned, she can't walk when the pain's bad. And we've got the headache again, mainly in the temples and the base of the skull, worse during the day, and the jaw with the clenching, the restricted movement and the pain. She talks about a hay fever. It's quite annoying too. Itchiness, stringy mucus in the eyes, itchy throat. The dust really upsets her, and she gets these chilblains during winter. So we look at her face, and we're not going to do the whole facial analysis. This is just sort of a quick snapshot to give you an idea of what we're doing. This is a sketch of her, and we're just going to show you on these two sketches, front and profile, 5 psoric features that are noticed. We actually used between 14 and 16 features from her face in total to get her total analysis. I'm just going to show you 5. So here's this outward motion with the hairline, the down-turned eyes, and from the side profile, we've got this slope but straight forehead. We've got, we take a line from the bridge down to the chin, and there's a bit of aerodynamic sloping happening in there, which is 1 yellow point or 1 psoric point, and her ears are higher than what we would expect on average. So she's got 5 psoric points there. However, when we look at a total chart, there's a bit more, but I'm not going to go into the details. You'll see that she has between 7 and 8 different features that occur in our psoric or yellow column. The downturned eyes, the M-shaped hairline, her front teeth have a presentation of psora, her smile, her forehead lines. She has 2 lines between her eyebrows and the sloped forehead. And she's just starting to develop lines under her eyes, which we're putting under the question mark. She only has 2 psychotic features, a wider nose, and her top lip is a little more full. She has 5 to 6 syphilitic features, the higher hairline, some asymmetry, her bottom teeth are crooked, her bridge is indented, her eyes are more wide set than normal, and the bottom half of her forehead is almost curved, bit of a question mark there, but we can see this column is where the dominance lies. So we know that she's going to need a psoric remedy. She's psoric dominant, she needs a psoric dominant remedy. This repertorization's probably got a little more rubrics than we would normally take, but it's just an example using RadarOpus. So we've got the discharges with the eyes, the pain in the jaw, she's got the chilblains, the sleep ameliorates, the motion aggravates, the lying ameliorates, the sensation of constriction, the ropey tenacious secretions, which is both nose and eyes. The winter's a bit of an aggravating season for her, and so is the dust. Now you can see there's quite a lot of remedies. We've got arsenicum, belladonna, calc, carboveg, hepa, kali carb, nux, fossac, phosphorus, pulsatilla, roostox, sepia, sulfur, and a few more that aren't covering all. So we'll just stop there, but that's quite a lot of remedies to look at. So what we do now is we put on our yellow or HFA psora confirmed filter, plus our testing filters. So we've got another 24 remedies being looked at there. And which of those 24 remedies match that case? Carboveg, kali carb, pulsatilla, and sulfur. These would be the main 4 remedies that we would look at for her case. Okay, so we go back just to the confirmed remedies, and we see that also bryonia and lycopodium are quite close there too. So possibly these 6 remedies we'd be looking at. Now, you may remember she'd already had some of these remedies, and there's another way of looking at it too, adding in the testing, a bit of duplication there. Okay, so back to the confirmed graph again, and we're looking at carboveg, kali carb, pulsatilla, sulfur with bryonia and lycopodium in the background. Now, you might remember from the beginning that she'd already tried the sulfur and the pulsatilla, so we're going to go for the carboveg. We basically just go to the beginning of the graph. We don't do any differentiation because essentially what we know about her is what we know about her, and what we know about her really isn't differentiating those 4 remedies. So all we know is it's probably one of them. She's tried 2. Let's try the 3rd. So because she's very busy, she's working in this high-profile job, she's studying, she's using a lot of energy, the pain is quite bad, she's got the headache, the jaw issue, and the hay fever. We're going to put her on a 30C, but we're going to give it to her twice daily just to start to see if that replenishment of energy is going to help her. So we talk to her a month later, and she says straight away her headache's got a lot better, which is great. The hay fever is reduced, but still there. but no real change to the stomach. So we've got to look at totality with the case. Even though we've had a good starting point, that stomach's a very key problem for her. It should have changed. It's telling us probably that remedy resonates, but not quite enough. So all we have to do is go back to our previous rep to have a look at what our next remedy choice would be. She also mentions the jaw tension has some improvement too. So we go back, and of course we see that after carbo-veg, which is here, we have kali-carb, which has not yet been tried. So it's very easy when we get this follow-up. We've got a graph, we've done our face, we don't have to repeat the process, we just have to look at it again and make a different choice. So we choose kali-carb 30C twice daily. And I make that point because one of the one of the really good things about HFA is once you put that little bit of extra work in with the face at the beginning, and it can be as low as 10 to 15 minutes once you get good at it, even 5 minutes for some really clear faces, you're already so in the ballpark, you're going to get somewhere fairly quickly, even if you don't get there first time. And the carbo-veg gave enough to that patient that she was really confident. She was like, well, this is good. I've got a bit of an improvement here, even if it wasn't her stomach. She's more than happy to keep coming back. And that's what we've got to do with our clinics, is we've got to give our patients the confidence to keep coming back to get a great outcome. So we don't always get it straight away, but we've got to give them something. It's really difficult if a patient keeps coming back and nothing. It still can happen, but if you get the face right, it's far less likely. So she gets her kali-carb 30C twice a day. We see her again in January. Wow, 90% improvement with her stomach. She is very happy. That's more than she's ever experienced on anything, homeopathic or otherwise. Headaches, even better than the carbo-veg. Just telling us, that stomach not being touched on the carbo-veg, even though the headaches were quite improved, it just kind of was giving us a little clue we should try another remedy. So even better, she's very happy. The hay fevers, it's not too bad, but it's still a bit of a problem with the dust. So there's an environmental factor that she's just highly sensitive to, and obviously quite difficult to live in a dust-free environment. So we keep going with the kali-carb twice daily. And what we do is we also add on a little bit of extra information for her. We know the stomach's much better. We know the headaches are good. The jaw is more relaxed. The hay fever is okay, but she's still sensitive. So we tell her, look, if you get a hay fever day, just do some rapid dosing, okay? Which is just put your remedy in water, give it a shake and take it every couple of hours for that day. Just see how that goes and do you 2 times daily on the other days. So she reports back in April, look, she is feeling fantastic. Even the hay fever, 80% better. She has only had to rapid dose a few times because that twice daily dose is really starting to build her system. She has no problems with her stomach, no problems with headaches. She's forgotten the jaw problem altogether. Pretty common when people, when pain is removed, they just forget all about it. So keep good notes just to remind them of how good the remedy's been. And we just tell her to continue dosing, and we'll do an assessment later on. Of course, we're in lockdown by this stage. It's all a bit miserable for everybody, but she's doing really well. Okay, so we go back again and we look at the graph without any filter. And we can see there's our carbo-veg and our kali-carb, and there's our other psoric remedies. But we don't have to look at arsenic or belladonna or calc or hepa. We don't even consider them because we know she's dominantly psoric and she needs one of these remedies. And when you put the filter on, they're the ones that pop up to the front. So why use general rubrics? We really got to make sure our remedy doesn't get excluded too early in our graph. Repping is like casting a net for the perfect fish. We bring in a lot of fish with a wide cast, but we discard the ones that don't fit our miasmatic profile. So remember, 6/7 of those remedies by miasm will not be the best remedies for the case. It doesn't matter how good they look on the totality. They're not matching the miasms, so we just don't look at them. So we only give remedies that match totality and miasm until we achieve the best outcome. Let's look at another case. Again, this is a female, and we treat her over, let's say about 6 months. So we take her case symptoms. We do a repertorization, focusing on the generals and modalities. We do her face for the dominant miasm, and then we apply the HFA filter to just select our remedy. So she's 19, and she also has stomach problems, but they're different to the first patient. You will see lots of variations of the same sort of diagnostic. Hers, she just was really sick after eating. She's tried antibiotics without any change. She finds it starts anywhere from 2 minutes to 2 hours after eating, and again, no particular food that she can work out. She also finds if she overeats, she gets it, but then she can have a snack and feel quite nauseous. For the last 4 months, she gets this quite sudden sensation that she'll vomit, particularly when she wakes up. Sometimes it's just from going from a sitting or lying to a standing position, or she might lean over and then rise, and that sensation comes on. She often feels it after a shower, or she will even vomit in the shower. 80% of her problems are after dinner, about 10% after lunch, and obviously the rest are sporadic, breakfast or snacks. She will vomit everything that's eaten. It was an acidic vomit, not so much now. We don't really know why it's changed. We just take note of that. And she doesn't like drinking water. That makes it feel worse. And she's got some burping with this acid at the back of the throat. So quite a different presentation to our first patient. She also has headaches. That's not uncommon. She has had a CT scan, which says she has sinus inflammation, hence the antibiotics, which has made about a 50% improvement in her headaches. But she's still getting them, particularly after poor sleeps or when she's stressed. Usually about 1 to 3 times per week. They're always at the temples, with the neck and back of the head being involved. It's a constant pain, better for rubbing, worse in the morning on rising. She's getting cold sores too, one after another on her lips. They kind of scab, it grows, it falls off, and then they come back larger. Usually they last a week or so. She has stress in her life. She's got a new job. She's at college. Her boyfriend's working in another state. So everybody has stress to some degree, lesser or greater stress, and it does impact them. Now let's look at her face. Again, we're just going to pull out 5 features. We did 12 to 13 features in her case, and we're just going to look at her syphilitic or blue features. So she has a higher hairline between the eyebrows and the beginning of the hairline. She has quite a long or pointed defined chin. She has, her ears are at what we would call an average level, but they're quite small. Even though they start at the right level, they're quite small ears. This is a syphilitic feature. She has the curved forehead, another syphilitic or blue feature, and the indented bridge. So these are just 5 things that we see on her face just from profile and from up. But in total, she does have more features than that. She, in fact, has 5 red or psychotic features. They're quite dominant on her face, and at a quick glance, you would think that they might be part of her final analysis, being as she has the nose, lips, straighter hairline, the single line, and the distance of the bridge all give 1 psychotic or red point each. But she, in fact, has 7 syphilitic or blue features, and this is where our formula comes in. 2 or more in one of these 3 columns becomes dominant. So even though she's got a fair bit of the psychosis or red features, she is dominantly in the blue group or the syphilitic group. Okay, so let's have a look at her radar rep. We took the head pain on the morning, rising aggravates. We took the pain at the temples, and the rubbing ameliorates. We took the vomiting after drinking and the vomiting after eating and the sudden vomiting and the worst after waking after sleep. So this is her generalised repertorization: pulsatilla, arsenicum, belladonna, sepia, roostox, zinc, podophyllum, aethusia. I don't even know what that remedy is. Vanilla, I'm assuming, and then a few others. So these are the remedies that we are looking at. So let's put on the HFA filter. This is the HFA Blue Remedies filter, the confirmed remedies. And we see that mercury, plumbum, cantharis, baryta, conium, mersurium, aurum, and syphilinum, these obviously aren't going to be good enough to use because they don't cover enough totality. This would be probably our first choice, would be the mercury. However, we're just going to add in the testing remedies as well. These are the ones that we're thinking could well be in this group for different reasons that I won't go into now. We do quite a bit of research on both structure and presentation of remedies. And we see that this aetheusia is quite interesting. It's really coming through all of these rubrics, which is even more than the mercury, even though the mercury is confirmed. So, look, this woman's entered through our training clinic. We do a few training cases as well as a lot of private clinic. And obviously the training cases are the ones that make their way to the webinars. So because she's a training case, we'll be a little more experimental. Probably mercury would be given in the private clinic first, but in this case, we actually decided to try the aetheusia first because it was really covering the stomach, the headaches, the cold sores, and she had menstrual problems as well, and just the general stress. So it had come through on a nice generalized repertorization. Of course, it's a small remedy. We don't see it very often. So she gets just a 30C once daily, and she reports a month later that within a week of taking the remedy, she notices a real improvement. All her stomach symptoms are gone. She's only had a few minor episodes, which is a dramatic change for her. She has a little bit of nausea after the larger meals only, and she's trying to keep to smaller meals, which is probably good advice for everybody. The acidity's all gone. She burps occasionally, but just average burping. The headaches barely has them at all. The neck pain's gone. She did have a cold sore, but it went after 1 week, and the one that replaced it was just small, and that did come after a party night with alcohol. She is 19 after all. And she's had a slight cold, but she moved through it really quickly, which is a good sign too. Immune system's becoming more effective. Okay, so we see her a month later. Her stomach is still good. She did throw up once, but she'd had a very big meal, and she's starting to realise this is not good for her. Also, takeaway food, no surprises there. Most of us don't feel so good after takeaway food. So she's starting to be educated now on a little bit of eating fresh whole food. Which it's a great opportunity to get the good remedy and then to start to teach the patient how they can go even further with it. The burping is nothing much, no headaches, no neck pain, no cold sores, just an occasional cough in the mornings. So we continue with the remedy a month later. Look, she's had some more stress with house moving and a new job. And again, a bit too many processed foods, but really, she says, nothing compared to before the remedy. Everything's much, much better. And the advice is just keep going with the remedy, same dose, but do try to eat as well as you can. And we catch up with her in February. She's actually decided to stop the remedy. We did discuss that over an email, and this has happened. She's formed balance. She's doing well. She doesn't need the remedy at this point. She's still got no problems. So it's a great outcome on a remedy that we probably wouldn't have even noticed if we hadn't been testing it under that group. Okay, so when we look at her major graph, you can see the aetheusia is the 8th remedy down. We probably wouldn't have noticed it, and possibly without HFA picked quite a number of other remedies before we got to it. So HFA is wonderful for just bringing those remedies to your view. I'm just going to quickly give you, before we go back to Anna, just quickly an overview of the modular teaching that we do. So at our level 1, we have 10 classes, which is kind of like an introduction to homeopathy and HFA. But we've got some great feedback on this course, even from people who've done homeopathy before. It's just very succinct, about 7.5 hours, all done online at your own pace. Then we move into our HFA foundation course, which Grant's done all of that. We've got 45 hours of classes, 10 hours of web-based work, 25 hours of cases, and again, online at your own pace. And then we have level 3, which is what we recorded in India, which is another 7.5 hours. This is like a really good summary with all the latest case management. And that's actually something you purchase through the Homeopathic Academy. And then we have mentoring. We do mentoring. We just find that just a few hours at the end of all this just tips off just the few areas you might still have questions in. So we might look at your facial analysis or your repping technique or your case management technique with 1 or 2 of your cases, and we just do that via Skype. We can usually get through a full case in just over an hour, sometimes an hour. And we recommend, 4 or 5 hours there. And pretty much if you do that 100 hours, you will be really very good at your homeopathy in the clinic. So there we go. That's the first course. That's 125 hours. That's the 10 classes, which takes, 125 Australian dollars, which takes about 10 classes and 7 hours to complete. And we just do a really nice overview and drawing you into homeopathy and leading you toward HFA. So we cover the physical body and generals and the history of the facial structure and all about modalities, causation and individualization, your case taking, repertorizing, miasm theory, some management, and just about adaptation. That's a really important point we need to learn about. This is Grant's course, much more detailed, very comprehensive. We've always had excellent feedback from this course. It's 650 Australian dollars, which is about 500 US, and that gives you the 80 hours divided into both classes, cases, and some online work. And then we have the Indian course, which is another 7 hours, 180 US dollars. And that's a great summary or intro, but probably a better summary once you've done the other courses. 10 classes from Grant, 10 from myself, giving you a comprehensive and up-to-date view of HFA. And I'm just going to end it by saying, if you're interested in more cases, happy to do another webinar. Got a beautiful case that's come through the training clinic in the last few months. A little boy, beautiful little boy who suffered a major stroke and half his brain has been destroyed. He was put into a coma. He was actually declared dead and only revived so his family could say goodbye, but he'd survived with brain issues, as you would imagine. He's come to homeopathy, HFA homeopathy, at the age of 13 months, and first remedy chosen within weeks, experiencing improvements and increased learning. Like, we're really, it's amazing, some of these cases, they're just incredible. So we'd love to share that case with you if you're interested. So that's the end of our webinar today. I'm going to bring Grant back on and say hi to Anna so that we can do the Q&A component, and hopefully you've enjoyed the presentation. We've gone a little bit over time, but I think we've got just 10 or 15 minutes left for Q&A.
Yeah, great. Thank you both so much. That was so interesting. And I do want to highlight, and I just put it in the comment box, that we do have a bundle sale for HFA and RadarOpus. So if you want to check that out, I just put that in the comment box. And for Louise and Grant, there was a quick question. What's the difference between confirmed and testing filters? Somebody asked that, I think, about the RadarOpus program.
Okay, you go.
I'm happy to answer that. So essentially, a confirmed remedy is a remedy that we have put into the HFA system. So sulfur being a yellow or soric remedy, mercury being a blue or syphilitic remedy. And we've allocated around 70 remedies to the 7 miasms. And we've used them in a reproducible way, right? Whereas, say, that aetheusia case, that aetheusia had been put in, we have like a second level, which is our testing level. It's a question mark. We're not 100% sure yet, but the signs are that there's a strong likelihood. Now, we don't know until we get more cases, and a case that's really definitive. Her case was very definitive, less than a week. She had this really good outcome. So we can pretty much now, and we still haven't said it, we'd probably like to find another aetheusia case. I have to say that I've been doing this, 25 years, and Grant's over 30 now. Aetheusia cases, they don't walk through your clinic door every day, so it might take a while, but we'll just leave it there. So what it does is it brings it to your attention that it's worth looking at, worth trialling. So we have these two levels, I suppose, but the confirmed are the ones that generally in private clinic will go for first, because they've just proven themselves over and over.
Okay, very interesting. And a question, so it sounds like this can be translated even to children, babies, right? Because their facial features, you can tell right away. Like, how soon after can you tell?
Well, we've done it on a 4-year-old who is a family member. So, 4-day-old. Sorry, I said the wrong thing there. My apologies. And that was like incredible to work out this little girl's miasm at the age of 4 days. And, obviously it was looking at her quite intently and working it out. But, you know, we get babies through the clinic. It is harder to take the photos of the babies because they don't stay still. And when you're measuring angles, you know, you've got to capture them still. So sometimes our standard protocol for photos is 9 good photos, and we give, you know, very thorough instructions on how to take them. And we do a lot of training in how to take good photos, something we didn't know at the beginning, but we worked out over time. The better the photo, the better the analysis. So that's important. But 4 days and up to people in their 90s. And, yeah, you can. The structure's there. It's all there. You've just got to be able to read it. There's just less on the baby. You know, they don't have any lines, no teeth, you know, so there's a little less to work with, but the totality is still the same.
Okay, that's so interesting. Okay, another question. Have you guys ever seen any other body part be very useful besides the face in determining the miasms?
There are different systems. I mean, in acupuncture, for example, there is tongue diagnosis and so on. I mean, I don't know how transferable that is across into a homeopathic system. And then we saw people in India that will do it from fingernails and so on. The difference with the face is the face is designed for expression. Right? So it is designed to convey to other people. It's essentially for other people. It's designed to take our emotions, take our thoughts, take our seriousness, take our joy, take our sadness, and convey the intensity to other people. That's its function. So in that sense, I don't go outside of the face simply because it is the best mechanism for one. We're all used to looking at it. We are trained at a very young age to instinctively identify people via their facial structure. You know, if you go to a rock concert or something like that and you're meeting somebody at a designated spot, there is another 30,000 people walking past you, and the moment you see your friend or your partner, you spot them straight away. It's not their height, it's not their hair color, it's not in anything at all. You know them from their face, and we're very well trained into that, particularly because we've grown up in tribes. Very important to know that the person with that great big rock in their hand with an angry look on their face is somebody perhaps to avoid. So we are instinctively used to reading it. It's not a technical art that has to be taken from scratch. All that you have to do now is place those features in a homeopathic perspective. But you know, like I said, we're designed to do it. So no, I understand that there are other features, but I think that they would be lesser because it's not their design to be read, whereas the face is designed for that purpose.
And you can see from the sketches that the brief look we did at those 2 girls' cases, those 5 psoric features, those 5 syphilitic features, they're quite easy to recognise. You know, the difference between something that's curved or straight, you know, even a child can work out the difference. It's like doing a simple jigsaw puzzle. All you're doing is extracting those shapes and angles and popping them into that 3-column system that we use. And we've actually, I haven't even mentioned it, but we've actually got software for that too, where you can click on facial images and it will work out the miasm for you. So you don't even have to kind of learn where the allocation is. It's probably a good idea to learn it, but yeah, we do have software for that as well. So we've developed quite a lot of learning tools to go with this whole concept. It's just so good. I would never ever do chronic prescribing without the facial diagnostic to just push you into that group of remedies that are one of them, at the very least, is most likely to do a really good job with the case.
Yeah, great. And Heidi is asking, how much for everything. And so Heidi, I think you should go to their website, vcch.org, and then you can decide what classes, and if you want to take them all, you can sign up for all of them there. They have the breakdown of everything. So that would be the easiest.
Yeah.
And then a couple of questions. So there are several remedies that are often placed in different miasms by different homeopaths, like sepia, Sankaran places in the leprosy miasm. How do you guys determine which miasm a remedy should be? Is that because of cured cases?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it has to prove itself. I mean, in the end, if the outcome and the theory don't match, then the theory is wrong. So we always, I think I said to you right at the beginning, this all came about because I just pretty much stripped homeopathy back to its bare bones. The only thing that I took as a granted was the similamin, because if you take that out, you may as well not practice at all. But apart from that, from single doses, multiple doses, miasms, the whole thing, I stripped it right back to bare bones and rebuilt it. And I only did it for me. I had no intention of necessarily sharing this or writing books, and that came much, much later, and it came by others' requests. But for me, I just stripped it right back because that's just the way that I work. And essentially the way that when you talk about I've just lost track of the question.
I think it was the allocation of remedies to miasm. Look, it's basically cured cases in a nutshell. Yes, I mean that was worked out from the very beginning.
There was a little bit of theory in it, though. I mean, and that little bit of theory was understanding exactly what miasmatic remedies had in common. As Louise pointed out, when you take pathology as the foundation, which we have always done, then the pathology does not discriminate at all, even right down to simple things like warts. You've still got all of the different miasms involved, but then people would come in there, other authors would come in, they'd say, oh yes, but that's the psychotic part of this syphilitic remedy, or that's the psoric part of that psychotic. I mean, in the end, it's so confusing, it's non-functional, or it was for me anyway. And so in the end, what would happen is that it became meaningless. If everything belongs to everything, then we don't even have to be selective, and that doesn't make sense at all. So when I looked at what all of the psoric remedies had in common, one of the things that they all had in common was this centrifugal action. So they have this ability to be able to push things out to the periphery. If you look at what the psychotic remedies have in common, then they all have in common a sacrifice of a small, less consequential area of the body to imprison any infection or any invader. Hence why some of them are prone to inflammatory or congestive conditions. Right? And it's the same with the syphilis. It's a conservation of energy. You see this conservation of energy when times get really harsh. You see it in hibernating animals or deciduous plants, or it's the withdrawal of the periphery to make sure that the center has everything that it needs, all the vitality. And that's what, when I started to understand that, that's what made me make the shift from the miasms as something that is really dark and destructive and really can't be eradicated, because supposedly there's so many layers almost dating back to Adam and Eve, again becomes a bit of a futile exercise. But when you start to understand that if somebody has a protective mechanism, if we're going to take SORA, that centrifugal action of protecting the vital inner core by throwing symptoms out onto the periphery, if we come up with a remedy like sulfur, we're just doubling up on the body's ability, on what the body wants to do. And that's why it works so well. That's why it harmonizes so well. And it also helps you understand why, if you give the wrong remedy, if you take, say, I'll stick sulfur as a remedy, but we've got a psychotic patient. So we've got a system that is designed to imprison and encapsulate any sort of infection to protect the vital inner core. And I come along with a remedy like sulfur, and I give it a whole lot of instructions that I want it thrown out, not to encapsulate, but to throw out. Now, all of a sudden, you can see why a well-repertorized remedy will create an aggravation, because it's not harmonious to the way that body, that person is programmed to defend themselves. So some of it was theory, but a lot of it of selecting the remedies also came from the process of photographing people's faces. And then once we knew that it was sharing a commonality. So what we would do is that if somebody had barytic carb, which is syphilitic, mercury that was syphilitic, we would see what facial features they had in common, and that would build up a bit of a dossier of facial features. But more than that, we could then begin by analysing the different features between barytic carb and between mercury. We could see commonalities there as well. And then I would use radar to do searches on other remedies that would also have those features in them. And then we would look at them and see whether or not they had that overall inward motion to match. Because it's not about just the individual rubrics. It's about the overall motion of the remedy. It's whether it's inward, whatever. Yeah.
And yes, you definitely take pictures. Do you also draw when you're with the patient? Draw their face?
No, it's nothing like that. And all it is really, it's just measurements. So we're just, as you could see through Louise's examples, that what we're looking at is that we're looking at sizes, shapes, and we're looking at the different measurements of them. So we take people's faces and then we analyze them just in reference to shape and position.
The only reason there are sketches is it's a privacy thing, because as we know, like the patients give their approval to use their case, but at the same time, it's an age now where photos can be clicked and copied, and it's just out of respect for privacy that it's still their face as their face presents, but it's just done in a format that can't be possibly misused, I suppose. So that's the only reason. And actually, ironically, the sketches in a way to help you to draw your eye to what you're looking at, like to really train your eye to see the feature clearly. And in our software, we use all sketches. So we transitioned in the first book from black and white photos, and then we went to sketches, which were probably a little artistic. Then we have dropped back to more simplified sketches. So we've experimented with different ways of teaching HFA, and the photos, as I mentioned, they're really, really important. We started out with 3 photos, then we moved to 5, now we do 9. And they each have a different perspective that you're looking at, and there's a reason they're taken slightly differently. And we find that combination gives us good totality. So we rarely see patients in person now. They're all done via Skype, phone. Many of them are outside of Australia. Nice. So most actually, yeah. So we have a pretty good following in the United States, actually, and all those people just send the photos as we send instructions, and they send the photos the way they're told to take them. Sometimes they have to repeat a few if they aren't done, quite straight enough. And from that, the analysis is done. There's a health performer. The analysis is done on the totality of their symptoms, and then a remedy is chosen, and then an appointment is made to see how the first remedy goes. And to your credit, I think you're running at around 40 or 50% of people, first remedy starting to have an impact. Obviously, still another half are not, and then we have to assess why, what's going on. Did we make a mistake with the analysis? Is the totality possibly something's missing? Different reasons, but it's still pretty quick. I think on average, and some of the cases you're getting particularly are really pretty profoundly difficult cases, up to 80% are getting results over about 4 remedy goes, and up to 50% of them in the first remedy. So it doesn't happen all the time, and you get good patches and not so good patches, but overall.
Yeah, we're talking about people with a lot of really serious behavioural problems too. Yeah. And obviously any sort of parent that is going to search out an international homeopath, they've already been through probably the medical system, local homeopaths. It takes them, they're in a desperate state, which also shows you how serious these cases are. So we're not just sort of talking about run-of-the-mill sort of cases here. They're very deep, and so to be able to affect them in this sort of manner and so quickly, I think is a testament to the system.
Definitely.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I want to be respectful of your guys' time. There are other questions.
We'll take another couple. Go and do it.
Okay. There were a couple of the same questions talking about asking when you would use, like for example, psychosora, or the blends, or a sora outward, syphilis inward. Like, can you talk a little bit about that? There was a few questions about the blend. That's just that formula. I don't know if you remember the second case where she had 7 blue. What we do fairly quickly in our training is we remove ourselves from the pathological names of miasms. We've only put them into the webinar because that's what everyone's familiar with, but we talk about blue patients, blue remedies, yellow patients, yellow remedies, because it's all about directional force. So in that Aethusia case where she had blue or inward motion energy, she had 7 features on her face that were blue and 5 that were red, showing that she still had some psychosis there, but that blue was dominant, so she needs a dominant remedy. Now, if she'd had 6 reds and 7 blues, or 7-7 or 8-7, she would have been in the purple group, psychosyphilis. So it's literally when 2 of the primary miasms join within 1 point of one another, that's a duomiasm. Or if she'd have had, say, 5 yellows, 5 reds, 6 blues, we would have given her a brown remedy. So it's a very simple formula just based on dominance.
If you go, this is all based on the organon. If you go back to Hahnemann talking about the miasms, he talks about how 2 miasms living in the same body at the same time, the stronger will always repel the weaker. But he does talk about then that if 2 miasms are living in the same body at the same time are of equal strength, then they combine to create a complex miasm. So essentially that's what this is. That's what the orange and the purple and the green and the brown are. They're complex miasms because they are of equal strength. Now, how do we know that they're of equal strength? We know that because each miasm will influence structure to the degree of which it is capable. So the amount of, and we're reading structure. So if Sora has got 7 features and then psychosis has got 7 features, then we know that those 2 internal miasms are of equal strength, which means that they'll combine, and that's where we get our orange.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Well, this was so fascinating. Thank you both so much for sharing this with everybody. And yeah, anybody who's really interested, please go to their website so that you can hopefully take classes, learn more. I'm super interested. I treat a lot of pandas, and so I'm like, oh wow, how can this, relate to pandas cases?
Well, this relates. Look, it's perfect for pandas, because the reality is with pandas is that now we're kind of doing a private conversation here, but the thing with pandas is that it has a trigger factor, and what you'll notice is that it's not just about understanding that it is an inflammatory condition, but what happens is that it reaches a stage of inflammation where there is an energetic trigger that is set off, and that panda's kid goes into a state of fight or flight. Now, fight or flight is not that's an energetic response, and in order to get them out of that, you need an energetic medicine, and this is where homeopathy really comes into its own. It does more for cases like PANS and PANDAS than you'll see any other system do, mainly because of that. Everything to do with PANDAS is about going into fight or flight and being in a state of hyper awareness where they don't even know. They're when you go into fight or flight, you're in a program now. You're in a natural program, and what you would have heard is that this instinctive fight or flight program means that conscious deliberation is relegated to the background, which is why you'll hear your patients talk about how they don't feel as if they're in control of their own lives. They feel as if their impulses are telling them something that they don't even want to do. And here what you're seeing is that tug of war between consciousness and the natural program. And nature has a program that when we're in danger, because consciousness is slow, because it's a deliberation, it switches consciousness off, so you go into instinctive action, which is great for really short-term responses. But the reality is PANDAS is a long-term response. It won't switch itself off. And so now they're almost like they're helpless bystanders to this instinctual thing that's going on and on that they just can't control. And that's why you get them talking about how they feel as if they're going mad. They feel as if they're possessed. They feel all these other things, which is true. It's a true feeling, but they're not possessed. All they are is that they're in a state of fight or flight that they can't get themselves out of. And to be quite frank, and I'm a naturopath too, no amount of dietary change is going to bring them out of that. It'll help once they are out from going back in, but when they're in it, they need something energetic to get themselves out. I don't need to use homeopathy if I don't need to. I've got a lot of strings to my bow, but I'm telling you that homeopathy in cases like these behavioral problems is second to none. Nothing comes even close, but you must have the constitutional right. And to do that, we're right back to Hahnemann. You've got to have that miasm. That's the base.
Yeah, well, great. Well, thank you both so much. I really enjoyed this webinar. You're getting a lot of thank yous, a lot of people saying, I have your book. I've used your method at work. So you guys should check it out. So you're getting a lot of thank yous.
Fabulous. All right. Well, it was lovely to speak with you, and it was nice to be able to connect with a lot of people, even if we can't see them.
Yes. Thank you both.